Life, as we know, isn't predictable. It's messy, complicated, and often brutally unfair. But here's the paradox: even in the middle of chaos, there's someone working behind the scenes. Think about it. Seasons change, storms roll in and out, and yet the world keeps turning. That's not random. That's a sign of design, of order beneath the disorder. God's sovereign hand guides every season of our lives, even when we can't see it or refuse to believe it. We all face times when life feels impossible to understand. Maybe you've lost someone you love. Maybe your plans collapsed overnight, or you're wrestling with guilt, shame, or regret. It's natural to wonder where God is in those moments. It's natural to ask why a good God would allow suffering or disappointment to touch our lives. But what if, just what if the very things we think are destroying us are actually being used to shape us into who we're meant to become? See, sovereignty doesn't mean God only shows up in our victories, our good days, or the highlight reels we share with others. It means He is present in our worst moments too, bending even the broken pieces of our lives toward a greater purpose. That's a staggering thought, that the creator of the universe, who set galaxies in motion, is also intimately involved in the small, often painful details of our daily lives. And this isn't some naive optimism or denial of pain. It's a profound, even unsettling acknowledgement that what we call random, tragic, or meaningless doesn't escape God's notice. Sometimes we forget that seasons have purposes. Winter, harsh and cold, forces roots to grow deeper. Spring brings new life that couldn't exist without the death of autumn leaves. Summer ripens what was planted, and autumn reminds us that letting go can be a path to renewal. And so it goes with us. The dry seasons of our lives might feel unbearable, but they're often the times when our faith is driven deeper, when our character is refined, and when we discover strength we didn't know we had. Of course, it rarely feels that way in the moment. That's where faith becomes less about certainty and more about courage. Courage to keep walking when we can't see the path, to keep believing when everything screams that hope is foolish. Because faith isn't just intellectual agreement that God exists. It's a daily decision to trust that His hand is steady even when our world is shaking. You might not see it today, you might not see it tomorrow, but look back one day and you'll see the fingerprints of grace on moments that once looked like ruin. You'll realize that even the detours and dead ends had meaning, and maybe, just maybe, you'll see that God was never absent, not for a second. At the end of the day, it's not about understanding every twist and turn. It's about trusting that the author of your story knows exactly where it's going. Because even when life feels out of control, God is still in control, and He's working it all for your good. You know, it's a strange thing about suffering. Most of us, when hardship hits, immediately think, why me? We feel targeted, as though life or God Himself is punishing us for some hidden flaw, some past mistake we can't erase. But what if, really think about this, what if that hardship isn't a punishment at all? What if, in a paradoxical and almost unsettling sense, it's a tool? A tool being used to shape you into someone stronger, wiser, and more deeply alive than you could ever become in comfort alone. See, people often misunderstand the nature of challenge. They see it as life trying to break them down. But in truth, challenge is life's way of building you up. It's like lifting a weight that feels impossible at first. You strain, you tremble, and your muscles ache under the pressure, but given enough repetition, those very muscles grow. They get stronger, more resilient. And isn't the same true of your character, your courage, and your compassion? You're being forged in real time through resistance. The problem is, we don't like the process. We want the strength, but not the struggle. We want the wisdom, but not the pain that births it. But think carefully, when in your life have you grown the most? When did you discover your capacity for patience, humility, or endurance? It wasn't on the good days when everything came easily. It was in the valleys, those dark places where you felt unseen, misunderstood, maybe even betrayed. Yet somehow, after surviving what you thought would destroy you, you emerged different. Humbled, but also undeniably stronger, and that's the hard truth. Challenge is necessary. We're not talking about needless suffering or cruelty for its own sake. That's not redemptive. But the inevitable difficulties of living, the heartbreaks, the disappointments, the failures, they become tools in the hands of something or someone greater than us. They till the soil of your soul, breaking apart the hardened ground so new life can take root. This isn't to glorify suffering or say it's always fair. It isn't. Life can be brutally unfair. But the mystery, and it really is a mystery, is that the very things that feel like curses can become blessings if only we allow them to teach us rather than define us. That heartbreak you thought would crush you might teach you empathy. That failure that burned your pride might instill humility. The grief you thought would never lift might deepen your love for those still here. And here's what's remarkable. Over time, as you look back, you start to see that the most painful chapters in your story often become the most meaningful. They become the parts where you found out what you truly believe, what you're really made of, and what actually matters. The cracks, as they say, are where the light gets in. So maybe the challenge isn't proof that God's against you. Maybe, just maybe, it's proof He's still at work within you, shaping, refining, and strengthening you into who you were meant to be. And if you can see that, you'll realize that even the hardest blows weren't there to end you, but to build you into something that can't so easily be broken. You know, there's something profoundly humbling about realizing how little we actually control in this life. We plan, we prepare, we convince ourselves that if we just do everything right, life will cooperate. And then, inevitably, it doesn't. Illness comes out of nowhere, people leave, opportunities vanish, or circumstances shift in ways we couldn't have possibly predicted. And it's right there, in the rubble of what we thought we knew, that we come face with the question, can we trust even when we don't understand? It's tempting to think faith means having it all figured out, that if we truly believe, we'll have the answers to every why, every how, every when. But real faith isn't certainty dressed up in religious language. Real faith is choosing to trust precisely because we don't have the answers. It's a kind of disciplined humility, a conscious surrender to the truth that our perspective is painfully limited and there's a larger picture we can't yet see. And that's not an easy thing to accept. We're wired to seek meaning, to connect the dots, to explain away our pain. When tragedy strikes, our instinct is to ask, why did this happen? What does it mean? And sometimes, heartbreakingly, the answers don't come, at least not when or how we want them. But even then, trust invites us to keep walking, to say, I don't see it now, but I believe there's a purpose beyond my vision. That's not naive optimism. That's courage in its rawest form. Think of it like this. Imagine standing in front of a massive tapestry from the backside. All you'd see are knots, loose threads, and chaos. No pattern, no beauty, just mess. But flip it over, and suddenly there's a design so intricate it takes your breath away. Life often feels like we're stuck staring at the backside. The trust comes in believing their is another side, even if we won't fully see it in this lifetime. And here's what's remarkable. People who have walked through the darkest valleys often emerge not bitter, but somehow softer, deeper, even more alive. They'll tell you in quiet moments that it wasn't the certainty that saved them, it was the choice to trust anyway, to keep moving even when the path felt invisible, to keep hoping even when hope felt foolish. And over time, they discovered that trust became an anchor, something stronger than any storm. It doesn't mean we don't wrestle with doubt. Of course we do. Doubt isn't the enemy of faith, it's part of being human. But every time we choose trust over cynicism, every time we refuse to let what we don't know overshadow what we do know, that we're loved, that we're not alone, we become a little braver, a little freer. So yes, life will hand us questions we can't answer. It will confront us with mysteries that feel unfair, even cruel. But what if in those moments the most radical thing we can do is keep trusting anyway? Trust that even in the silence there's a presence that sees, that cares, and that is still writing our story. Because at the end of the day, it isn't understanding that holds us together, it's trust. And sometimes that trust itself is the greatest evidence that we're being led by something far greater than what we can see.
One of the most haunting questions people carry, often silently, is whether their pain actually, i.e., matters. Whether the heartbreak, the betrayal, the loss, whether any of it can mean something beyond raw suffering. And it's understandable to ask that. Pain by its very nature demands explanation. We ache to know it isn't wasted. But here's where things get profoundly hopeful, almost paradoxical. Pain, when surrendered rather than resisted, can become the very soil where our deepest purpose takes root. You see it in people who've fought through the fire. They emerge changed, not merely scarred but transformed. Their words carry a weight, a compassion that can't be faked or bought. They speak, and you hear not just knowledge, but understanding. And why? Because they've been there ash. They've sat in the ashes, felt the darkness press in, and yet somehow kept breathing. That journey, as terrible as it felt, has equipped them to walk alongside others in ways no textbook or sermon ever could. It's an uncomfortable truth, but there's something about suffering that strips us of illusion. It shatters the shallow certainty that life should always feel good, that we're owed a smooth road. And strangely enough, that shattering can open us up to empathy, to humility, to deeper love. We begin to see other people's wounds, not as problems to fix quickly, but as places to sit together in honest solidarity. And that right there is where pain starts to find purpose. Think of the countless stories where tragedy births movements, where grief births service. A parent who's lost a child and chooses to help others through similar loss. An addict who, after years in darkness, becomes a counselor guiding others toward recovery. These people didn't go looking for pain. They wouldn't wish it on anyone. But the very thing that almost destroyed them becomes the thing that gives their life a depth and mission they never imagined. And it's not just grand public acts. Purpose might show up quietly, a newfound gentleness, a patience that wasn't there before, a willingness to listen rather than judge. It might mean being able to look someone in the eye and say, I don't have all the answers, but I know what it feels like, and you're not alone. In those moments, your suffering becomes a bridge, connecting you to others in a way untouched people can't replicate. Now, this doesn't romanticize pain or pretend it's good in itself. It isn't. Pain can break us if we let it become our identity. But there's a profound difference between being broken ate by pain and being broken open by it. One imprisons us, the other expands us. And it's precisely there, in that willingness to stay open, to keep our hearts soft, even when the world tells us to harden, that God, or the transcendent order of reality itself, can do something extraordinary. So yes, life will wound us, sometimes deeply, but it doesn't have to end there. because that wound can become the place where light enters, where grace flows, and where your story stops being just about survival and starts becoming a story of redemption. And that is how pain, unimaginably, becomes purpose. And even what once threatened to destroy us can end up saving someone else. It's a peculiar thing about being human. We're wired for immediacy. We want what we hope for to appear now, or at least soon enough to quiet the gnawing uncertainty. And when it doesn't, when days stretch into months and months into years, it's painfully easy to conclude that silence must mean rejection, that the door isn't merely closed for now, but bolted shut forever. But what if? And this requires genuine humility. What if isn't the same thing as denial? Consider this. Growth never happens instantly. A seed doesn't sprout the moment it's buried. There's a hidden season, an unseen gestation, where roots stretch down before anything breaks the surface. And yet we, standing above ground, see nothing and assume nothing's happening. But underground, life is quietly, stubbornly preparing. Often what looks like inactivity is actually necessary preparation. It's similar in our own lives. We pray, we strive, we pour ourselves into something deeply meaningful, and still the breakthrough doesn't come on our timetable. And that can breed a dangerous cynicism, a creeping bitterness that says, if it hasn't happened yet, it never will. But waiting, frustrating as it feels, often protects us from stepping into places we aren't ready to stand. Sometimes what looks like divine silence is actually divine mercy. A pause so we can mature, so circumstances can align, or so that what we long for won't crush us when it finally arrives. There's an old idea, found across philosophies and spiritual traditions, that timing itself is a form of wisdom. It's not just GAE happens that matters. It's GONE. And when you truly let that sink in, you realize that delay might be an essential part of the story, not a defect in it. A delay can refine your motives, deepen your resilience, or redirect you towards something better than you imagined when you first began. Think about how often people discover, years later, that what once felt like rejection led them somewhere profoundly better. A relationship that ended painfully, only to make room for one built on deeper respect and love. A job they didn't get, only to find a path that fits their gifts more authentically. At the time it felt like failure, like the universe or God himself had turned away. But with perspective, the delay reveals itself not as a punishment, but as a redirection. And this isn't about passive waiting. It's not about folding your hands and doing nothing. Waiting well is active. It means preparing your character, refining your skills, staying faithful to what's in front of you. It means showing up every day with the quiet confidence that something worthwhile is being woven behind the curtain, even if you can't see it yet. In the end, the measure of hope isn't how quickly it's fulfilled, but how steadfastly we hold it when fulfillment feels distant. To wait with faith is to say, even if the answer hasn't come, I believe it still can, and still might. Because sometimes the very thing you're waiting for isn't being withheld, it's simply being perfected. And when it does arrive, you'll see the wisdom of every moment you thought was wasted. When we step back and really look at it, all the twists, heartbreaks, small victories, and seasons of silence, it becomes clear that life was never meant to be a straight, unbroken line toward comfort. It's a story written with tension and struggle, with chapters we wouldn't have chosen, but that somehow, in ways we rarely see until later, become essential to who we're becoming. And that's the heart of it. God is working it all for your good. Not just the moments that feel blessed, but the ones that feel cursed, confusing, and hopeless, too. It doesn't mean life will suddenly become easy or predictable. It doesn't mean you'll always understand why things had to happen the way they did. But it does mean there's a deeper purpose being woven, even through what feels like chaos. Challenges aren't punishments. They're tools that carve depth and resilience into your character. Trust isn't built on perfect understanding. It's forged when you dare to believe that something greater is at work, even in silence. Pain doesn't have to end in bitterness. It can be transformed into purpose that blesses others. And those delays you despise, they might just be the pauses that prepare you for something you couldn't carry before. In the end, it all circles back to this: living each day in hope and gratitude, not because every question has been answered or every prayer has been fulfilled, but because you've chosen to trust that the author of your story knows exactly where it's going, and that choice changes you. It frees you to keep walking, keep believing, and keep loving, even when the path is unclear. So hold on to this truth: your story isn't finished, and the hardest parts are not wasted. Even what feels broken beyond repair can be redeemed into something that brings light and strength you couldn't have imagined. And though you may not see it yet, every tear, every trial, and every unanswered prayer is being gathered, shaped, and written into a narrative far greater than the one you'd write for yourself. And that, ultimately, is why you can live. Not just survive, but truly live. In hope and gratitude. Because even now, God is working it all for your good. If there's one thing I've noticed, both in my own life and in the countless stories people share, it's that hope and gratitude aren't passive feelings that simply happen to us. They're disciplines, and they're disciplines most worth cultivating precisely because life is unpredictable, often harsh, and sometimes deeply unfair. Yet, despite all of that, it's possible to live each day with a posture that says, even if everything isn't as I wish it to be, there's still meaning here. There's still something good here. Now, that's not a denial of reality. It isn't pretending everything's fine when it's clearly not. Hope is different from blind optimism. Blind optimism refuses to see the darkness. Hope sees it fully and still believes light can break through. And gratitude doesn't come from having a perfect life. It comes from recognizing the gifts that exist right alongside the pain. It's the discipline of saying, yes, this hurts. Yes, this is heavy. But look, here too is something to be thankful for. It's astonishing what happens when people live that way. I've spoken to individuals who've endured unimaginable loss, betrayal, or disappointment. And what strikes me isn't their pain. That's expected. But their refusal to let bitterness have the final word. Somehow they wake each morning still willing to see beauty in small things. A kind word from a stranger, the laughter of a child, the simple grace of being alive another day. That choice, to keep noticing, to keep thanking, to keep hoping, isn't weakness. It's an act of tremendous courage. And here's the paradox. The more you practice hope and gratitude, the more you see to be hopeful and grateful for. It reshapes your vision. You begin to find meaning, even in moments you once dismissed as mundane. You start to realize that life's richness doesn't lie only in grand victories or perfect circumstances, but in the countless quiet mercies that sustain us along the way. At its deepest level, living in hope and gratitude is about trusting that life, for all its mess and mystery, it's still moving somewhere meaningful. It's believing that our pain isn't pointless, our efforts aren't wasted, and our days, even the hard ones, are held within a story larger than we can see. And when we live that way, we not only change ourselves, we become sources of hope and encouragement to others. We remind them, by the way we walk through our own valleys, that despair doesn't have to be the end of the story. So the invitation is this: wake up each day and choose to see the gifts that are there. Speak gratitude aloud, even for small mercies. Let yourself imagine that tomorrow could hold something new, something good. Because the truth is, living in hope and gratitude doesn't mean denying reality. It means defying despair. And in doing so, you don't just survive the journey. You illuminate it for yourself and for everyone still trying to find their way.